This is Michael Tucker, and you're watching the new Legends on Deck podcast with host Brian Koss and David Conde.
Welcome to episode 47 of the Legends on Deck podcast. I'm Brian Koss, along with co-host David Conde. And today's guest is longtime baseball coach at the junior college and summer collegiate level in the Commonwealth of Virginia, Jack Moore. Jack joins us today to share his experiences and insight with the game over his many years in the game. Welcome, Jack.
Good morning. Good morning, guys. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for being on. And just real quick, Brian, I mean, it feels like you went on vacation, I went on vacation. We were spitting out podcasts one by one. We went on vacation. I felt like, oh my God, I'm back in the seat going again. I'm like, how do we do this again? You know?
Right? No, I hear you, because it was month of June was a whirlwind of Legends on Deck podcasts, and in July is a little slower pace for us. So, but that's okay.
Well, we had to give time back to our families. We had to take our vacation.
We did, yeah, for sure.
So, so Jack, normally the first question we get out for our guests is kind of like give us a background of, where you started in the game, give us a little summary, how were you introduced to the game, and how did it lead to your decision to coach?
Okay. Actually, when I was probably 5 years old, the one thing that I knew I was going to do with my life was I was going to be the quarterback of the Washington Redskins. My license plate to this day is SJ9 HOF Hall of Fame. It's Sonny Jurgensen, who's now 88 years of age. It's hard for me to imagine that. My first Washington Redskin game, I was 6, and I saw Vince Lombardi on the sideline in 1969 when I was 7. So I had all that history. Pro football was by far the thing I loved the most. But I played Little League, and for whatever reason, Carl Yastrzemski was my favorite player. The guy that caught my eye in the 60s was Yastrzemski. Growing up, as I've gone through time and gone to Fenway and things, people are like, so did you grow up in, Northeast and Matt? And I was like, no, I was actually from Virginia. So they can't get the connection of how did I fall in love with Yastrzemski being from Virginia, but I did. So I was a Red Sox fan growing up. 75 broke my heart. 86 was worse. But I get into high school, and I play high school baseball. My JV coach was a guy that's just got released from the Toronto Blue Jays. I know that was really instrumental to me as far as, when I grew up in a section of Virginia between Washington, D.C. and Richmond. I'm 70 miles from D.C., 40 miles from Richmond. Not really totally off the beaten path, right off 95. But growing up 70 miles from DC and growing up, going to NFL games and things, I kind of knew there was a big world out there. But I did grow up in a small town. But this guy was a just released pitcher, and he doesn't know what to do with us at 13 and 14 and like junior high, other than put us through professional, pitch and fielding practice. And we're learning to cover first every day. That's all we did for an hour and a half every day. But I was mesmerized. I'm like, oh my gosh, that guy played professional baseball. Like, he got paid to play baseball. Like, woo, that's a big deal. And, then I go to a junior college, Chowan in North Carolina, which is now a 4-year school because a friend of mine had gone there, and I played there. And, the head coach when I was at Chowan had played at Gardner-Webb when it was a junior college, and they were looking to start things over there with the new coaching staff. And he told me one day when I was there as a sophomore, they're looking for players at Gardner-Webb. So I drive across state. I work out for them. They say nice things. I end up going to Gardner-Webb, which was phenomenal. It was a great place. So I finished up at Gardner-Webb. It was NAIA at the time. Finished up playing there. I wanted to play in the big leagues. I wasn't that good, but I had that vision. Like, I want to be around the highest levels of baseball. And I just hadn't been around people that were, other than, like I said, I had that JV baseball coach. So when I get out, I know I want to teach. I know absolutely I want to teach. And I had an interest in law. But when I get out, I look around and I find that Lewisburg had a position for a resident director. And, of course, Lewisburg Junior College in North Carolina outside of Raleigh, they have a wall at that school, if you're not familiar with it, but they have a wall with, like, I don't know, it looks like 150 names on the wall, easily, maybe closer to 200. They're all the guys that have played pro ball from there. And, oh, yeah, and probably 15, 18 names that have been in the big leagues. So they just have this it's funny in baseball circles, in junior college circles, people know it, but a lot of times people don't. And then I kind of getting into the history with the 40 years ago, well, not even that far back, 30 years ago, draft and follow, the JUCO teams were nothing but drafted players. And I remember in the early 2000s when I was a lawyer and I had a friend, and this is down the road in the story, but I started helping a friend of mine do player representation who'd played Division I basketball. And we went to a particular Division I scout day, and he saw the wares. He saw what was going on. And he's an athlete. The guy played Division I basketball. We go to a junior college, and he kind of tugged at my sleeve and went, "Why is everybody here so much better?" And I'm like, because they're all here to get drafted. Well, when you're in the circuit of recruiting and you're just like at everybody else's these college recruiting things, it's a lot of times Division I coaches would like say, they're talking to parents like, if your kid can't walk and talk or chew gum at the same time, he might be the junior college. So there's Division I, then there's D2, and there's D3. And if you really can't play, you go to junior college, and there's a chuckle fit. I mean, think, you guys don't know, So when I was at Lewisburg, so I go there in 86, and Russ Frazier kind of takes me under his wing, and I get a chance to coach there. Our entire team was drafted. I mean, everybody was drafted. Everybody. And Tony Beasley, one of my closest friends who coaches third base for the Texas Rangers right now, Tony was there at that time. And Tony will tell you the same thing. And we laugh about it all the time. Entire team's drafted. Everybody's under control. And what the old was, if you were drafted, the 36th round when it was 62 rounds, and you went to the junior college, you could up your stock, possibly sign before going back in the draft or go back in the day. So everybody's a pro guy. And I was there for a year at Lewisburg. And then when we played Chowan, where I went to school, Jerry Hawkins, who had coached me at Chowan, says, "You want to come back and work here?" And I'm like, great. So I went there, started graduate school at Old Dominion, followed by moving to Norfolk, Virginia, and I went to law school. And then that kind of picks up the rest of the story. But as far as me as a player, played in college, and then I knew I wanted to teach and I knew I wanted to coach. So I tried to, figure out every kind of back angle I could to do that. And that's kind of what started me on the path on the college coaching. But started at Lewisburg.
I did want to say one thing. Out of everything I heard, everything you said, but the one thing I heard you say was you were a Red Sox fan in 1986.
Oh yeah.
So
I remember I remember where I was sitting. I was actually at Lewisburg the night of the Bill Buckner play, and I got to say this too. It's what bothers me about fans. And I'm sorry I cut you off and going down another path, but what I hate a lot of times about people in baseball and fans and everything else, we've all lived it. The 30 some odd years, almost 40 years now since. I'll ask people, they'll go, Bill Buckner missed that ground ball. And I said, yeah, what was the score when he missed the ground ball? And it's like it was a 10-run era. And I'm like, the score was already tied. They're like, what? And I'm like, yeah, Bob Stanley had already wild pitched the tying run in. The winning run scores on the ground ball that Wilson hit. But it was Wilson, right? Yeah.
Mookie Wilson.
Yeah, I said, but the game was already tied. And they're like, no, it was a 10-run error. No, they were up by 9. And I was like, no. And then when you go back and replay it, you realize, I don't know that Boston could have overcome being demoralized by giving up that lead anyway. Even if he feels that ground ball and steps on first and beats him to the bag, if that happens, that game's still on and it goes extra innings maybe, but we never know how it would finish. But I thought it was unfair to Buckner, clearly, that he got labeled with that, because people forget Calvin Schiraldi came in. God bless him, but I mean, he couldn't get an out with 2 strikes with 2 outs over and over and over until it got to that point. But everything gets stuck on Buckner, and I just thought that was totally unfair, because I met Buckner at a hot stove dinner in Richmond, Virginia one night. And of course he had to open with that story, like and I felt so bad for him because he was a great player. He was a great player. You know, he's a borderline Hall of Fame type of player, and he has to wear that the rest of his career or rest of his life, that like he missed the ground ball. So, but that's the unfairness. But yeah, it was heartbreaking as a Red Sox fan.
Well, I had to show this.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry. No, you mentioned it. So I've been, I think that year I was 13 years old in my room, and I cried like a baby because I really literally was in the room crying they're going to lose. And my parents are in the other room, and I didn't want to talk to anybody. And literally when that happened, I could not believe that was the most amazing game I've ever seen. No one ever expected that. So even though Buckner has to wear that, and I think the same way like you, now that you look back and about the game and everything, the fact that that was probably one of the greatest World Series I've ever seen. The back and forth.
Oh yeah.
That one play marred him for life, but it was just like amazing, just that series. You know, how it was played out and how both teams came together. Even the Red Sox getting into the World Series was a great game against the A's. So it was, but I didn't mean to throw that in your face. I just had to show you the message.
No. Well, in 75, I was 13. So when I was 13 in 75, I'm going to tell you what, and it's all on YouTube. That's the beauty of YouTube. You know, I've relived my entire childhood just watching everything. But that 75 series, that game 6, and I know people just growing up, game 6 of that. Go back and watch it. When Bernie Carbo hits that 3-run homer to give Boston a chance to be back in it, what was that, the 8th inning? Off the bench, what people forget is the pitch before he literally hit out of the catcher's mitt. It was probably the worst swing, last moment emergency hack. He fouls up the pitch off. Then he hits his ball over the center field wall 1.5 miles to tie the game and keep Boston from being eliminated, only for Fisk to go on in the 12th inning to hit the foul pole. I mean, it's amazing. And then the next night they lose. And Yastrzemski makes the last out. In 78, Yastrzemski makes the last out, you know. So if you're a Red Sox fan, you've lived all that, and now it's hard to imagine 4 World Series victories since all that. You know, this next century has, you know, I don't know. I guess it's the thing about time passage and my age and everything else. I remember the stories in '86 of the 80-year-old Red Sox fans had been waiting all their lives to win. You know, they thought, well, this has got to be it. And then they don't, you know, and then it gets to 2004 before it finally trips up. But 2003, the year before the Boone home run, you can't make that up, you know, and Grady Little getting fired over whether you take Pedro out, and who would have not kept Pedro in, you know. That's the beauty of baseball, all the history, all the stories. It's funny how you can remember exactly where you were sitting when you saw these things, though, you know. And I do remember '86. I walked out of that night when Game 6 was over, and I'm like, they just can't win. They can't. It's not going to ever happen. But remember, the way they beat the Angels right before that, though, was kind of the same thing. They did to the Angels exactly what happened to them, you know, a week later.
Yeah, I said the A's. It was the Angels. But the ironic thing with being a Mets fan and having all that, since 2018, I volunteer with the Latin director of English classes for the Red Sox. I've been volunteering with her, and I come in and I help with the Latin ball players to teach them English. I do mock interviews. So all in all, you know, I've come in helping the Red Sox. So I'm a little bit of a Red Sox fan because of these guys, because I get to watch them and I've seen them get to the majors, and it's been amazing. So at the end of the day, you know, baseball is just an amazing sport. You know, whatever team you're watching, you can have your favorite teams, but then you can watch the Angels play with Ohtani. You could watch, the Yankees with Judge, and just love the game for what it brings out and what it brings everyone together. I mean, watching the All-Star game, I actually fell asleep. I was tired, but you're watching the All-Star and Elias Diaz, it's a home run for them to win. And, this guy, it's like just an amazing – baseball can do so much for so many people.
Sure.
So it's awesome game. But anyway, Brian, I got off the tangent there.
Oh, yeah. No, that's perfect. Those are good stories. Those are great stories. So Jack, I want to talk to you a little bit about, so you leave, you're in North Carolina coaching junior college, and you spend a lot of years at the junior college level, coaching baseball, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm time in North Carolina. Then I come back eventually after practicing law. Rappahannock Community College is where I last coached in Virginia. The Virginia Community College system was founded 67, 68. The state legislature, passes this regional low-cost education community college throughout the state. Mills Godwin, former governor, long since passed away, but Mills Godwin it was really kind of his brainchild. And one of the things that they wrote into all the founding charters was no sports. Not going to do it. That's not what this is about. And I remember a school in the circuit. There was 23 regions, and a school in the circuit kind of inherited from a college, a gym, and they had to call. This is the state, they had to call the stands in the gym, the actual bleachers, athletic observation planks or something, Yeah, so they had all these different rules and regulations, and then some renegade presidents kind of in the early 80s, 15 years or so into the community college system, said, hey, we're going to have club sports. So I went to Rappahannock as a coach, had been there a number of years, was retiring when it was a club sport, and transitioned it into National Junior College. So there have been community colleges throughout Virginia that since have done that, but it was tough because the mindset had always been Virginia doesn't do college sports at the 2-year level. We just don't do that kind of thing. So then when they started to do it, there was always that club mentality. Jimmy and Billy and Timmy ought to be able to go out and get fresh air and run around in the weeds and play, and it's not competitive. And so there was really some growing pains with that. But anyway, yeah, so I did junior college there. And so, yeah, overall, at different points in and out between practicing law and doing other things, I've certainly been around junior college athletics for, 30 plus years, almost 40 years. And I've seen a lot of changes in it. The biggest change, like I said, from the baseball standpoint, was the old draft and follow.
Yeah.
And I've heard talk that they're going to kind of go back. But I mean, well, that's another whole point where I think our conversation is going to go. I think that there were things that were done from the prospect standpoint, kids playing ball leading to where they needed to be professional players, that has been completely turned on its head. And I don't think anything is done nearly as well as it used to be. So, which, I mean, to kind of address that, I mean, to kind of start going down that road of what I've seen as far as development of players. If you ask yourself the question, where do players come from? Players come from sandlots. Players come from, neighborhoods. Players come from different kind of backgrounds. And the biggest thing I've noticed in coaching summer baseball, coaching kids from different colleges, from different levels of collegiate sports and everything else, is they're not nearly as assertive. Now, this is probably old man get off my lawn too. Like, I'm getting old. And so but I tell you what an old scout said to me one time. That's what fascinated me when I did player representation with that buddy of mine, the D1 basketball player. When I got involved with that and with the baseball team with a White Sox scout buddy of mine, when I started hanging around old guys that really had played, like there was this one beautiful old guy, he's long since passed, and he in the mid 50s played with the Red Sox. He's a 6'6" guy, always had to chew in. I'm talking beautiful human being. I love this guy. And I would just go around and say, tell me stories, and he was talking about Ted Williams and BP.
Yeah.
He would and he told me once, I said, hey, Jim, I said, was Ted Williams? He goes, boy, I'm gonna tell you what, whatever they ever tell you, Ted was the best, because I saw it. And I go, okay. He goes, I'll tell you what, Jack, one day we had a 21-year-old kid from Texas in, and that's when we used to throw live BP in spring training. And he throws the ball in the corner, and Ted takes it. And the kid's 21, shrugs his shoulders and looks around the infield like, what the hell is he waiting on? Like, why didn't he swing? And he said, we're all around the cage like, uh-oh. Like, oh, gosh, that wasn't the smartest thing to do. He goes, I swear on everything sacred, Jack. Next pitch, Ted lines it by his ear. He hit a line drive right through the box by his ear. He goes, and then Ted was mad, and he went crack in the woods, crack in the woods, crack. And it was just like every pitch he hit farther and farther out into the woods. And he goes, I saw that. I witnessed that. An upset Ted Williams just took it out on this 21-year-old kid. So anyway, he said to me one time, this older guy, he goes, you know what's wrong with kids today when it comes to baseball? And I said, what's that? He said, did you guys ever play in sandlots? Sandlot baseball. They go, yeah. And he goes, who made the rules? I said, either the kid who could kick everybody else's rear or the kid that brought the ball. And he goes, exactly. How many adults around? I said, none. Mom just eventually came out when it got dark and said, get your ass home because it's time for dinner, And I go, yeah. And he goes, so how did you regulate yourselves? Pretty much we had fights or got along or didn't, whatever, but we regulated. He goes, so by the time you played organized baseball, what was the coach to you? I said, it's the guy that wrote the lineup. Did he teach you how to play? No. You learned how to play with your peers. You learned how to be a teammate, and all that. And then it really struck me. He goes, the reason these kids can't play today is they can't do anything without being told exactly what to do. They don't just go play. They don't have expectations of the teammate dynamic and all that because they haven't been in a sandlot having to figure it out on their own. And I thought, wow, that's really a lot of truth to that. And I've noticed it in coaching, for example, third base. I was on a travel team 20 years ago. Everybody on the team ended up playing pro ball. Many of them are guys that are on TV, but we were loaded with players. And I remember I'm coaching third, and it's the first weekend I have these kids, and this is 20 years ago, and the ball gets hit into left field. And I just kind of, as I turn my shoulders to get a read on where the ball's going, I make the glance back to the runner running from first to second, and he's staring at me running, and he's looking like, do I do it? Do I do it? Like, do I advance? So when he makes it over to third, I'm like, let me ask you something. When that ball was hit to left, why are you looking at me? Well, I wanted to know if you were going to send me. I'm like, send you? And then I was like, the average reaction time is X. So if that left fielder kicks the ball, strokes out, whatever, and goes down, you got to relay my reaction to that off of, why the hell aren't you just looking at the left fielder? And when it all came down to it in a discussion, well, I didn't want to get sent to third and get thrown out and you be upset.
Yeah.
and I'm like, okay, well then I just go over all the time. I'm like, the old saw about don't make the first or third out. It's real. Okay. I'd like to have you at third with one out. I don't want you thrown out getting there and end the inning or be the first, all that stuff applies. So if it's one out and that ball's in left field and you can get third out of it and there's that chance, take that risk. I'm good with that, son. Don't finish the inning or don't make the first out, but otherwise, but that's on you. You got, but that's how they are. And again, I wonder sometimes, well, am I reading too much into it? And I was the same way. But there are some kids, and it's varied through time, that are more aggressive, that do have a greater sense of what's going on. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Chris Rawl, but that's one of my favorite stories of all time. So Chris was this undersized, kind of skinny kid out of Chesapeake, Virginia, that I had for 2 weekends when I coached with the White Sox travel team. And on the third weekend, we were at William & Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia. And I went up to the parents. And I said, hey, they're going to Great Bridge High School, where, Justin Upton went, and a lot of other guys that have been, guys that come out of Chesapeake. So I go up to the parents and matter of factly say, your kid's not going to get drafted this year out of high school, but he's going to play pro ball. He needs to be at the right school. And the father's like, professional baseball, he doesn't even get love. And I said, well, I don't know what's going on at your high school, but he's a pro guy. And the father's like, my son's a pro guy. How do you know that? I said, because he can do two things. He can run and he can throw. And he was like, but and I said, dude, I'm telling you, the arm strength plays and he can fly. So the reason I bring up Chris, what I loved about Chris, when I coached third for this White Sox travel team, if he was at second base and a ball was put in play, if I didn't physically tackle him rounding third, he was going to score every time. So the one thing I knew about him as a coach instinctively is he had one gear, and all you had to do was rein that young man in. By the way, he goes on to be a first-team All-American his sophomore year at William and Mary, and he's a fifth-round pick. And then years later, they're like, what did you see? And I'm like, I'm telling you, dude, if they can throw and they can run, something's going to be found. And I just saw that he was 155 pounds at the time. But man, that kid they ended up running. And I heard before the Red Sox worked him out one time before the draft, he ran a 6.45 or something like that. And he played a number of years of pro ball. But your eyes tell you when those are kids. But his demeanor, too, what I loved about him is you didn't have to stuff the guts in. I love that kid because he was like, hey, Chris, when you're there, unless I physically roadblock you, you're not got it, coach. He's coming. Then there's the kids that are hesitant and they overproduce things and stuff like that. So, you see the ones that are just a little bit different. But I do see more and more kids won't stand out on their own play. They won't go on the edge and say, well, coach, I don't know. And it's a thing I've noticed from coaching. I had a summer league team about 7 or 8 years ago, and this is no lie. My right fielder ran a 6.5. My center fielder ran a 6.6. And my left fielder ran a 6.4. That was my outfield. Ball never touched the ground. And I told them, touch my watch was go when you want. And that's all we did was run. Because they could all three hit. They could all run. And they had never been given that before. Like, so, when the season started, I'm like, guys, you want to take a bet. Unless we're up 9-0 and I tell you to rein it in, like, go. Just go. Pick up the bag. Go. Take the next base. And they were aggressive kids that once they got that kind of you figure it out on your own. I said, if you get thrown out taking the extra base, I'll pick you up. We'll go on. We'll go to the next inning. Don't worry about it. And I think that's important. You don't want to make it base running errors, but you want them to feel like they can make them aggressive mistakes. And I do think kids are so overcoached now that they don't really feel comfortable doing things. I think they're always afraid of who made a mistake or did the coach send me or not send me and all that kind of stuff. But I guess it's human nature too. So anyway.
Well, it's funny you mentioned the Sandlot stuff because I was on David listened to my episode here recently. I was on a podcast called The Baseball Bucket List. And I had talked about Sandlot baseball. So I'm 39, right? I'll be 40 next year. I think I'm like the last group of kids that played Sandlot baseball.
Right.
Early 90s when the school still had open fences at the elementary school before all the Columbine stuff and all the things that have happened with the schools. So, I would grab neighborhood kids on a weekday morning in the summer like this, and we'd go up to the elementary school. Could be 5 of us, could be 10 of us, whatever, whoever was available that day. And we just play, right? And you just create a modified game. Everybody hits, everybody plays. You pitch, you throw, whatever it is. Sure. You learn the game. You imitate your favorite players.
Exactly.
And you have to, like you said, organize yourself and
get along
and figure out how to get along without fighting. So there's a good point about being overcoached. I mean, I think that some of the problems today is, yes, they are overcoached, they're overmanaged by parents, but at the same time, a little bit scarier of an environment out there. So I think maybe kids are also, parents are weary of letting their kids roam and do things on their own, especially at, I was maybe doing this at 9-10 years old, and other kids, nowadays, you're worried about your kids wandering off by themselves. So, and everything's structured. I mean, I'm guilty of it too. I've got 4 kids, and my my two little ones are very small, but the other two are elementary, middle school age, and everything is very structured, and we do it as parents. And it doesn't allow some of those learning things on your own.
On the issue we were talking about, I said there's a kinship. You're right at 40.
Yep.
And I that's kind of my wheelhouse of kids that I work with in pro ball. I mean, there's so many of the kids are right at 40 right now that a few years ago when I entered Virginia Beach area and started working with a bunch of these kids that ended up playing professionally. And, I could definitely see some difference in that 20 years between myself and them, but we did have the similar backgrounds in how we grew up and guys going to Sandlot. But what I was going to say that I noticed here a few years ago, I was coaching and teaching in college, and something struck me. I was telling these kids when I was growing up, and this is one of those old references, everything came through Ed Sullivan, like even prior to me, like Elvis Presley, the Beatles. And I said in the mid 80s, I was talking to a group of kids, it's probably 10 years ago. And I said, well, guys, you don't know what it was like to be big, like Michael Jackson, Madonna. And I said, my mother knew who Madonna was. She might not have liked everything. You know what I'm saying? We all had a common culture. When something happened on the Ed Sullivan Show on Sunday night, Monday morning water cooler talk, everybody was talking about the same thing. So I think that we had a common growing up. To be famous was to do something. You had to do something to become famous, and you could become famous. And CBS, NBC, and ABC were the only networks to be famous on. And now, of course, kids with social media, and I know old guy, talking, but really, you can be famous for being famous. It's a cliche statement, but it's true. Now, I say all that to say this. 10 years ago when I was coaching, I went on a particularly bad stretch with a group of kids. So I'm getting ready to start practice. And this might have been by the time Corey was playing. I think Corey was gone by this time. Yeah, Corey had played for me before. But anyway, I bring everybody to home plate. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to have a guy talk here. I said, guys, what's wrong with everybody? And this kid goes, Coach, I just don't feel like anybody's having any fun. And I went, this game is fun to you? And the kid goes, well, it should be. I said, what, did your mom tell you that? He goes, what's that supposed to mean? You never had fun playing? I said, not a moment. I don't remember a moment playing baseball that was fun. Well, then why'd you do it? I said, because it's the most enjoyable thing I ever did. Because it was competitive. But I said, when you're out there on the mound getting your ass handed to you and you give up 10 runs, that's not fun. And they're like, what? And I said, oh, okay. Something I got from my buddy Tom House. It struck me. Tom said years ago, I was out there with a group of 20, 30 baseball players, professional players. And he said, guys, whenever you put result in front of process, you will fail. It struck me. They want fun. They're not willing to put in what it takes. So then it dawned on me, the whole reason I wanted to play was to prove to other guys I could play. I thought that's why you played. You otherwise you sit and stand and watch somebody else play. Does that make sense? I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
And when that kid said, we're here to have fun, I'm like, what the hell is that? You put two sets of kids on the field and one group is out to have fun and the other's out to win. Well, and not even so much to win, to not be embarrassed. And I think that's important. That's another thing I learned from House. All the studies have shown the Michael Jordans was the top of the list. The people who are the phenomenal athletes always hated to lose far more than they loved to win.
Sure.
That's sense. What Matt, right. We all love to win. Wade, great.
Yeah.
Let's
right.
Well, yeah, but if there's to me, fun is no risk. Right? Yeah. I mean, if you go out and do something with no risk of absolute embarrassment, then I thought, wow, okay, the reason these guys can't really play either is they have no emotional stake in it. I had an emotional stake in whether I made a fool of myself that day on the field. You know what? So I will say this then too. I have a friend of mine that I got to be close to in the last 30, 35 years when I moved to Virginia Beach. And I don't throw his name out there, but he's a very accomplished major league player. And I'll never forget something he told me. He's like, Jack, I played in the big leagues till I was 38. And I go, yeah, great career. And he goes, you know what never got out of my head? I said, what? He goes, I never could. Every time I went on the mound my entire career, I never got this image out of my head. Pitch leaves 38. And I go, what's that? He goes, I didn't want to get sent home to my small town in Pennsylvania and have to explain to everyone how I failed. And I was like, that's why you were good.
Yeah,
Think about it.
It's that fire. It's that fire. You know, you want the public shaming or the
Yeah.
you know, to go back and worry about that. You know, it's
But when
funny you mentioned this. Is my son, who's 7 years old, he thinks like this. At 7 years old, it's strange. Like when I hear him, he'll say, "Well, the coaches, you know, the coaches on my little league team, they'll say, let's go have fun." And he's like, "You know what's more fun?" He says it's more fun to win. All right, so I'm gonna transition a little bit to you know, so you've coached in the Tidewater Summer League for a long time, which is a collegiate wood bat league, and we've covered quite a bit of collegiate wood bat stuff. And you also mentioned me some big players that you've been around that have come out of that region and played in that league. I think David Wright was one of them. I think Justin Verlander was one of them. What do you tell us a little bit about that league, and then also like what you see in some of these players and the talent level that's come out of that area of the country?
Well, I tell you what, I attribute me personally, it's wow, so many thoughts that just went through my head all at once. Like the other night, I'll say this, the other night I was at a game to see Josh Rupe's kid. And Josh Rupe pitched in the big leagues, 3 clubs, was with me at 11 doing lessons. So Josh was one of my from the time he was a kid. And he's in the stands and Josh is just a beautiful human being. I mean, they're family, you know, his parents, you know, Roger and Betty. And I just, now that I'm working with his kids, it's just wonderful. And his son Cooper was playing the other day. And Cooper's 12. And so Josh and I are kind of standing off to the side. I'm like, you're not coaching right now? He goes, no, Matt's handling it. I'm like, no way. And then Matt Smith is over coaching third, 6 years of pro ball, played at VMI. He was like David's best friend. Him and David Wright were always running together as kids. And he yells from over at third base, Jackie! And he starts yelling at me across the field, you know. So when the thing ends, we're standing there and it just strikes me. Matt and Josh are now 40-ish. They're right at 40, 41. And I'm out there with Josh's kids now. And I just realized how much I love Matt and Josh. You know, they're like sons. And the common thread was Townie Towns.
So yeah, let's talk a little bit more about the Tidewater. You had a, you know, you had this great group of guys that you've been with since, you know, since they were 11 years old, basically, and saw them evolve into major league ball players.
Yeah, and I wanted to, like I said, I wanted to give the credit again. I moved to Virginia Beach in 93.
Okay.
When I get to Virginia Beach in 93, I believe there were 2 people from the area in all of professional baseball. Trey McCoy, a real close friend of mine, and DJ Dozier. I think they were the only 2. Dozier went, of course, to Penn State, but Dozier was Kempsville High School, you know, football star, All-American, but also played pro baseball. And Trey McCoy was a friend of mine that was an All-American from First Colonial High School in Virginia Beach to play at Virginia Tech. And I don't think there was really anybody else. And then Jimmy Anderson got drafted in 94. I'm almost positive Jimmy got drafted in 94. He was like Western Branch. Jimmy pitched in the big leagues with the Pirates. But what was happening behind the scenes is that, as I said, Townie Townsend, who's one of the most impactful people in my life and everybody else's life, believe me. I mean, just one of these beautiful human beings. Oh gosh, I coached both of his sons and I love them like sons. And anyway, Townie played pro ball. He's from Philadelphia. He played in a Red Sox organization. He ends up in Hampton Roads, and he and Gary Lavelle, Gary 13 years, all-star in the big leagues, they opened a building together. So I land in Virginia Beach. I go to Jim and Prudy Ramsey at the Grand Slam there, this indoor facility, and start doing lessons. And then I watch all this unfold. And what Gary and Townie and some other really in-tune baseball people start doing is start the travel baseball stuff kind of which has been really, really an evil of the sport since because of how it's devolved. But at the time, it was like you didn't play on these certain teams unless you were somebody, which, I mean, was the reality of what they were doing. So the David Wrights and the Matt Smiths I mentioned, all these kids are there. David said years later when he was with the Mets, he gets to spring training and they're like, all right, we got bunt B and we're trying to get the lead out. We do such and such. And he goes, yeah, we called that C and that was D. And one of the Mets instructs, like, we talking about, I did all that when I was 11. And he was right. You know, we had a coach in the system. I don't know whether it was drillers or whether it was blasters, but it was one of those elite teams. And where it really struck me, I was doing a camp in Pennsylvania in the late 90s. And I was in Pennsylvania, and this elderly lady at this baseball camp said, honey, where are you from? And I said, Virginia Beach. And the look on her face, I'm like, oh, wow. Like, I see how the world's changing. She goes, honey, to her husband, he's from Virginia Beach, for God's sake. And then it was like Wright, Reynolds, Kadire, like everybody knew the names. And I'm like, you know, I saw these kids grow up. Then I started to realize every spring with the draft, first, second round, we're seeing all these guys go high in the draft. And what happened was some really good baseball people took the lead on instructing kids how to be professional players. I saw a video 15 years ago, and David Wright was on that interview, and they were like, what kind of edge do you think you had, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, I was taught to be a professional player and a professional in everything I did from the time I was 9. And he's right. They were just good people. And I've never loved the kid any more than I've loved David. David's, wow. It just, I mean, you know, his brother Steven I was tight with too. So it was 2 sets of kids. It was David and Steven, and then there was 2 younger ones. His mom was a PE teacher, I believe, and I know his dad was a detective with the Norfolk City Police and went on to be assistant chief of police. So solid family. Mom would bring David and Steven in to do baseball stuff when they were 11 and 9. Then I had Mark Reynolds every Wednesday night at 7:00 for a number of years, you know, and it was that kind of vibe. You'd be at the indoor facility. I remember when I first met Kadire. First time I met Kadire, he was just shy of 16, and he was hitting at Grand Slam. And this guy, you know, nudges me. He's like, what do you think? And I'm like, it's like a first rounder. And he goes, yeah, pretty good, isn't he? And I go, yeah, what year is he? He goes, junior. I said, what college? And the guy goes, no, junior in high school. I'm like, that kid's a junior? And he goes, yeah. And then I got to know Michael, and he's another one, just, you know, class act. And it just was in the water. You know, it was just in the water. You see, and I don't know if you were familiar. Baseball America about 10 years ago did a 25-year prospectus, like 25 years of the draft, and they ranked. Wow. Oh yeah, this is interesting. They rank all the states.
Yep.
And as you can imagine, 4 of the states for impact in Major League Baseball was Florida, Texas, California, Georgia.
Yep.
Number 5 is Virginia.
Wow.
And they say no mid-Atlantic state like Virginia should be in the top 5, but they are. And then you start going through the names and you're like, that's true. Like, where the hell did Virginia come? Well, I was around to see a lot of that. Now, the Verlander connection was this. In 1999, I get asked by a guy that's a White Sox scout to help him. There was a little bit of division between 2 coaches. He coached a team that was sponsored by the Mets. Then a guy went on with that group and ended up getting all the fielders. On the same team, B.J. Upton, David Wright, Zimmerman, and Reynolds were all in the same infield on the same travel team. We got the pitching. We got Tyler Lumsden, first rounder out of Cave Springs. We got Rupe. And then eventually, because of kind of a bust up in the team in Richmond, we have a guy, Bob Smith, who gets us Verlander on our fall ball team. We had Jeremy Jeffress right behind that. Jeremy was a first rounder. So the first time I see Verlander, I see him throw at William and Mary the summer before he's with us in the fall. He's 88, 89. I like him. There was a kid named Alan Baxter who was there, went on to be a third rounder, who was a very interesting character. Allen was 16 throwing 92, 93. And if you'd have said bet my life that day, it was Allen Baxter. Allen went on to throw 100. He ended up throwing 100 miles an hour. So it was just in the water, man. It was everywhere. Kids out. That's another thing. Richmond's impact was huge. Clay Meredith has that year with the Padres where he sets a record for the lowest ERA in 100 years. He was a sidewinder guy out of Richmond and went to VCU. I mean, the names just, oh my God, Lynchburg's had a bunch of guys. Josh Hall is one of my favorite kids I ever worked with, was out of Lynchburg. The third baseman that went to VCU out of EC Glass was a second rounder. He's skipping my mind now, but he played in the infield with Detroit, was a catcher that they transferred him to catcher. But anyway, kids are coming out of Virginia like it's ridiculous for that 10 or 15 years. But I got to say, what happened in Hampton Roads was Townie Townsend and Gary LaBelle. Those guys, and having that indoor facility and instilling that professionalism took it from, like I said, two guys in the area. Well, the other big impact in 97 was John Curtis and Kadire both went in the first round from the same high school. That's only the second time that had ever happened in Major League history. It had been 20 years prior. And Curtis went 17 overall. Kadire went 9th overall out of the same draft. So when it's happening, you're starting to see, because I've been there 4 years and boom, Kadire's drafted in the first round along with John Curtis. And then you're like, wow, this can, when you start turning on the TV and you're starting to see the kids that you saw grow up. And that was talked about. And I'll tell you somebody else, I never worked with him directly. Never had any, flipped them balls or anything, but I got to know him well, was Ryan Zimmerman. Because Ryan grew up, he's from North Carolina, and then his parents had relocated to Virginia Beach. And I saw him in high school, and I thought, he's kind of interesting kid. Then I see him at UVA his freshman year because he's with Reynolds. Reynolds is a sophomore, and now he's a freshman. And I'm like, oh, my God, I don't even know who that is. It's Brooks Robinson. I've never seen a kid make that kind of progression in 1 year. And I'm realizing, he's going to be the top 5 picks. And, of course, he was. But there was a kid that I worked with who was a real late bloomer who went the 21st round out of Virginia Wesleyan, Division III. He was a 21st round pick his senior year. The second night of the draft, or the second day of the draft, the night this kid went the 21st round, I'm at his home in Virginia Beach, this other kid, and I look up and Ryan Zimmerman's coming in. He was picked 4th overall the day before. I'll never forget that. I thought, wow, I'm at the get-together party for the 21st round kid, and the 4th overall pick showed up for him. Right? And I was like, Ryan, congratulations. He goes, gosh, Jack, I'm still pinching myself. I can't. And I'm like, what a solid human being. The day after you were picked 4th overall, you're at the party of your buddy that was a senior signed 21st rounder. And he was there for his friend. That's Ryan. I'll never forget that. I was like, that's pretty solid. But yeah, there's a lot of great people, a lot of great memories. Like I said, we lost Townie to cancer at 54 in 2009. Now, I just got to say this about that. At his wake, there was 400, 500 people in this auditorium. And he was a school teacher and a principal. And I saw a parade of kids, of females say, if not for Townie, I'd be dead or pregnant, in jail, something. And then males, I'd be dead on the street in a gang or whatever, if not. Townie was the kind of school administrator that would stop a kid in the hallway and jack him up into a locker and say, get your life straight or I'm coming after you. And there was a parade of people, had nothing to do with baseball, parade of young people saying, Townie saved my life. He was the same kind of coach. And you can imagine that, but that is what made that area really, really solid baseball people teaching the game correctly and impacting young people's lives. I mean, in big ways. And it became a pride thing. Like I said, when you travel and you stay in baseball circles, I'm from Virginia. Oh my gosh, you're from Virginia? It was just oh wow, Virginia. Yeah, it was you didn't think in your mind you'd take a backseat to anyone talent-wise or draft-wise, because we didn't. It was kids just rolling out into the big leagues all the time. So it's a neat thing. And of course, Verlander, he's a Hall of Famer.
Right.
He's can't miss Hall of Famer. I mean, that's been established 10 years ago. He's going to be a Hall of Famer. So yeah, there's been a lot of success. Kids have had a lot of success, and it's neat. It is weird though. And I'm sure you guys have definitely lived this too. When you turn on TV and go, like, I knew that kid when he was 11, like, and now. So when David had his run, 7 All-Star games and the rest, I never saw a kid that wanted it as bad. But I tell you what, his guy that he looked up to, that was his model, was Kadire. Everything David did was to be like Kadire, which was wonderful, because there's not a better mentor to have than Michael Kadire. Kadire's a solid human being. Yeah, they're just great. They're great. But that was David's guy. They're 4 years apart. I think they're like 4 years, maybe 4 years difference between them. And because Michael was born in 79 and David was born late 82. Yeah, so they're about 3 or 4 years apart. So that was kind of his mentor, his guy to follow. But yeah, it was neat. It's tailed off. It's tailed off a lot. I think there's still guys coming out of Hampton Roads, but not the frequency we had 20 years ago. It was pretty amazing.
Right. Well, I mean, there's
I want to say one
something
thing
going on there.
Sorry,
go ahead. No, I'm just commenting, David. Yeah, we do this every time. There's always some, David. It's interesting to me to hear these stories about, because baseball is such a grassroots game. These little pockets of places where these players emerge from, and usually it's not like one guy comes out of nowhere. It's usually like an environment. So that's the Tidewater environment.
Well, it's actually interesting you say that, because 12, 13 years ago, I was out in California with Tom House, and he was doing this coaching seminar, and he pulled me aside and he goes, I just finished doing a study. And I said, okay. He goes, yeah, it's called among people in athletics, clusters. Like, why does Mark Reynolds and Zimmerman and Kadire, and why does that happen? Or why do all these kids seem to influence each other? And he said that, Tom grew up in a part of California. He's like, there was 5 guys in his neighborhood that played in the big leagues. I think Andy Etchebarren was one of them, the catcher. And he told me, he said, I always kind of wondered, what happened. And the science kind of says that a kid growing up looks at TV and goes, those people are from a different planet. I could never do that. Then if somebody in the neighborhood does, that kind of aura or mystique goes, oh, then it could happen here.
Right.
Then other people follows. But what was interesting is he told me that on the flip side, that now this is what Tom said to me 10, 12 years ago. He asked me in 1995 what percent of Major League Baseball is Puerto Rican. And I said, I don't know. I got to believe it was pushing, I said, I guess, 8, 10. He goes, yeah, it's about 10%. What was it 20 years later? And he goes, 20 years later, it was 5%. And he was like, they kind of do what happened. They said what happened is, as more and more players from Puerto Rico became successful, they poured more money back into Little League fields in Puerto Rico, et cetera. And the kids got softer and they weren't as good. It literally worked in reverse. And I saw the same thing in Virginia Beach. I was working with the kid one time, and I'm not kidding. The mom brings out the checkbook at the end of a lesson and says, okay, yeah. Okay, so what are you thinking here? What are you thinking? And I was like, ma'am. And she's like, well, my husband and I sat down last night. We said piano lessons, dance lessons, whatever. We're going to put our kid in something. I understand you work with some kids like David Wright and things like that. What do you think of my son? The kid's 9. And I'm like, ma'am, he's 9. And she was like, but we want to know whether we're wasting our time investing in this kind of thing. And I was like, wow, because our area has produced some good kids, the parents think it's like a business plan.
Sure.
And then I thought, wow, this lady's really, I just looked at the kid. I said, Timmy, you want to come back? He goes, yes, sir, I enjoyed it. And I said, okay, if Timmy wants to come back, Timmy can come back. But if you're looking at this long term, I said, ma'am, I've seen kids at 14 that couldn't walk and chew gum at the same time. They're playing on TV now. And I've seen the kid at 12 that everybody thought was can't miss, and they never got any better than that. So, now I did tell Josh Rupe's father when he was 13 he'd pitch in the big leagues, and he thought I was crazy. And of course he did. So, I mean, I have seen kids that were electric young that you were like, oh gosh, that's a different planet type of kid. Something's different about them. But generally it's more that they paint by the numbers, and you see talent. David, you'll appreciate this as a Red Sox fan as well. But there have been 3 times in my life I've been in Major League Baseball games and thought there was a guy on the field. This is one of my favorite stories that I thought, wow, they look like they're on a different speed. The first one was Darryl Strawberry. I saw Strawberry one night in Atlanta go 5 for 5. And you know how in your mind you think of a one-hopper back to the mound? He hit a ball to right field at Claudell Washington for Atlanta. If he had moved just wrong one way or the other, the ball would have been to the wall. Like, he caught it defensively in right field. And then he hit a golf ball home run, and I went, wow. Now, I saw a 24-year-old Strawberry. I know he was a mess probably in a lot of ways, but holy cow, like 6'6", the whole 9 yards. The next guy I ever saw like that, and I saw Canseco, Griffey Jr., I've seen a lot of players, but when Rupe, that grew up with me, was with the Rangers, I got to see Josh Hamilton a lot. Guys, Hamilton was a different, you hear that, it's cliche, different animal. Holy cow. He looked like an 18-year-old in the backyard with a bunch of 12-year-olds. This is 08 when he's really on it. And last summer, God bless him, I had loved him from afar. And then last summer, when my friend Beasley is the interim manager for the Rangers, I go to Fenway, and I watched 2 days of Xander Bogaerts. Fellas, that guy is a different kind of cat. I had no idea he was that talented. I always have a watch on me. I got him 408 to first base on the ground ball. He went up the middle, and like, I thought he was kind of a third baseman masquerading as a shortstop, but man, you see him live. He is a different speed guy. Bogaerts is beautiful. I mean, like, when I saw him, so there's been a few guys I've seen like that were just, they're like they're playing at a different speed. It literally looks more aesthetically pleasing. You're like, wow, that looks beautiful. And then there's grinders, and there's guys that just, they have to put in. And that's a thing that I've learned with kids. It's just a dead end for me. But I have tried to make that discussion with kids. I'm like, guys, I've seen a lot better talents, physical talents than David Wright. I just never saw a kid one as bad. They're going, yeah. Like, you saw David Wright. Like, they don't get it. Like, David wasn't like the most physically imposing person. He's barely 6 feet tall, and he was an okay runner, and he had good on. Don't get me wrong, he was a major league player, successful, but he was a pudgy little guy. Like, he would go through growth spurts where he would kind of drop the baby fat and get pudgy again. So I saw all that with him, but God knows I never saw a kid that absorbed the game better than him. I never saw a kid that just played the game right like him. So that's how he became David Wright. But from the talent standpoint, I've seen unbelievable talent. Kids just kind of, you've all seen this, throw it away. But the guys that look like they're playing at a different speed, they're really, really rare. They're rare that you see the ones that just look that much different than the others.
Well, I think the recipe for today, and I coach kids 13, 14, 15, even the younger kids, and I always say the same thing. Hey, guys, let's just go to the park and play ball. And I think the difference, with the kids today and the kids back then when we grew up and we're just playing the game, and love the game, is too much of the internet, too much of this. So I think maybe if we create this trending sandlot baseball game and everyone has to play it, then we'll get more kids to jump back on the sandlot and just and just play the game and play their way. And then, like you said, and then grow into the sport. I think if we had more of that, I just think too many kids are so distracted with so much going on that they don't want to put the effort to put the work in. And I picked up on everything you're saying, which is so true, on how they're just waiting for the coach to tell them what to do. And maybe the guys like David Wright or the other guy who put the work in and got something really out of it are the ones that make it. You got some of the Latin ball players that come from, Venezuela, Dominican Republic, and I've seen them come to the Red Sox and like, man, you see as they walk, they just have that look of this is a baseball player. Like this guy has it. Like you can tell the throw and the hitting and the pitching. So everything you've touched on today is everything we thought about. But to hear you say it and know that these guys see that the fact that you've seen that as well is awesome to hear. Because you can tell that and maybe back then people didn't think David Wright, as pudgy as he was or the way he looked, would be a baseball player, but it's the love of the game and putting their heart into it is what takes them to that next level. So thank you for sharing that with us today. I mean, it's amazing to hear these stories and to know where these guys started and to where they ended up.
Well, on something else I'd want to address, I think the first Dominican the first Dominican kid I coached was like 12, 13 years ago. And to that day, every text is, I love you like a father. Like, I mean, this is like, he's like family. And I've gone on to gain probably half my baseball friends now are Dominicans. Like I've met so many Dominican guys. And I say that to say culturally, well, a few years ago, I got a friend of mine that's got an indoor facility in North Carolina. And I found out that Manny Ramirez was in there hitting with him on his way to Japan here a few years ago when he was in his mid-40s. So when I find out, I'm like, how are you holding out? I'm a Red Sox fan. So I go and I spent 2 days down there watching Manny hit. And I knew he grew up in New York. I think he left the DR when he was 13 or something like that. And he came to New York. So I got Manny Ramirez in a room and I just got to ask him all these questions. So I'm like, Manny, when did you know that you knew that you knew? Like, when did you know? He goes, Jack, I wasn't that good in high school. And I'm like, yeah, like you weren't that good. But it was interesting to hear him. He didn't think he was a first rounder. Now, I've known guys in New York that saw him play and they're like, he's the best hitter they'd ever seen and all that. But it's fascinating to me, the perspective of a young player. He questioned, he told me like, I thought it was okay or whatever, but he became Manny Ramirez. And I don't think any of the kids I ever worked with that were successful weren't fearful of that monster on their shoulder, whatever we've talked about earlier, that fear of failure. If you don't have that fear, I don't think you ever really progress. I guess that's where I'm going with it. If you think you got it all figured out, I haven't seen any kids that had it all figured out that made it. Manny Ramirez is in the top 5 hitters of the last 100 years, right-handed hitters. I mean, he is. Regardless of all the other stuff that's said about him or whatever, what the PEDs were alleged or whatever. The bottom line is the guy was productive, 555 home runs and all the rest, 314 batting average. And it was interesting to hear him talk about what his perspective was about being a player. Because you and I, we can look back at it and realize, him and Ortiz were like the greatest 3-4 hitters since Garrick and Ruth. They were. Yeah. They were that good. But they all question. They all, I think, have a little bit of, if you don't have that nagging question about whether you're good enough, I don't think you ever really achieve what you can achieve. You got to have that little bit of gnawing that you have something to prove. I think that's the key thing. All the good ones have something to prove, whatever it is, shut up their high school coach or, or somebody told them at one point they weren't going to be good enough. Whatever that is, you got to have that. I think you have to have that.
Absolutely right. So Jack, I think we're gonna have you on another time. I want to talk more about the Tom House pitching academy and all that. So that would be I think that'd be an awesome second episode with you in the near future. I just want to thank the sponsors real quick. DC3 Bat Company and EZIP Mortgage. Both David's EZIP Mortgage is a mortgage provider. And DC Bat Company, I don't have my glove again today. Actually been using it a lot. George and I have been playing a lot of catch with my new glove from DC3. Very cool. It's a Legends on Deck glove. Real quick plug for our merch shop as well. David's got it on. We got a lot of different Legends on Deck designs if you want to support the podcast in a financial way, to keep our episodes rolling, and also our website rolling. Help us out with some merch. Jack,
just get our stuff out there and
just share your stuff, man. Just share our stuff, put it on social media. This episode will be out soon. We got to hear the whole Tidewater Virginia story with Coach Jack Moore. Yeah, Thanks for
Thank you,
joining us,
gentlemen.
Jack.
Thank you, gentlemen. I really appreciate it. Brought back a lot of great memories.
It was
Thank you
awesome.
again.
Episode
right,
47.
Hmm?
I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah.